I'm slightly hesitant as a Brit to come to Israel and talk to you about Israeli security issues or political issues. I know that Brits have a tendency to go to places and lay down what they think should be happening and what the law should be. And in fact, my daughters, who are here today as well, reminded me that that there are only 22 countries in the world that Britain hasn't invaded so far. So far. There's more time to come. So bearing in mind that, I'll give you my perspective and I recognise I'm very much an outsider in this room. I think the issue that we are facing is, I compare it in some ways to an insurgency war, in some ways, and almost every insurgency war that has succeeded and that continues to succeed do so because the insurgents have a safe haven. They have a country maybe adjacent to the country they're fighting in, which gives them support. And we've seen that in numerous insurgencies, for example in Northern Ireland, where the IRA fighting the British had Southern Ireland as their safe haven. We have Afghanistan, where the Taliban had Pakistan and Iran and other places as their safe haven. And we have, of course, the Iraq campaign, where they had Syria as their safe haven. And this is the case, I think, in most successful insurgencies. Without that, it's relatively easy to eradicate them. I think in the case of, obviously, this type of insurgency that you're facing is slightly different to that. But I think the main safe haven for those people who are trying to oppose the state of Israel is the international community. It's not a kind of geographical safe haven. It's more perhaps of an intellectual, political safe haven. And it's the international community embodied by countries such as my own, such as the European Union. And incidentally, I'm speaking of those two organizations separately, although currently we're part of the European Union. Shortly we're going to have our independence. They were one of the, most countries in the world have had their independence from Britain, as you have. We're soon going to get our independence from the EU. The European Union. The European Union, thank goodness. The United Nations, of course, and various other countries, Western countries. I exclude Arab countries from this consideration, but these are people who provide safe haven and support, and I think that is, from my perspective, one of the main emphases of this project should be focusing on that safe haven. Of course, Israel has a very, very significant, the most significant role to play in obviously dealing with the situation itself, but also the international community. And I think the project, should be focusing on the international community. And Israel obviously has also devoted a great deal of effort to trying to, I think, persuade the international community of the reality of the situation as it exists today compared to the reality as many of them see it. And so I think that the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, they both, and all of Israel's other enemies, understand that the international community is almost the center of gravity of this insurgency, that they, and everything they try and do, whether it's stabbing vehicle rammings, whether it's rockets fired from Gaza, whatever tactics they decide to use, they're not using them because they think they could possibly defeat or even really dent the mighty state of Israel, because they know they can't. They're doing it because they want to get Israel to retaliate in such a way that they can then bring down the opprobrium of the international community, isolate Israel from the international community, and turn Israel into a pariah state. That's their tactics, and it's also their tactics in their diplomatic action when they're trying to gain access to different bodies. And these tactics work, and they work in ways such as in the last Gaza conflict, countries like the United Kingdom, the EU, the UN, all condemned Israel. They condemned Israel's actions, despite the fact that Israel was taking far greater steps to avoid the deaths of innocent civilians than any other country would. Yet they were condemned for war crimes by many of these international bodies. So I think their tactics are working, and therefore I believe that we should focus on that. We should persuade somehow, and I know many people have put a lot of effort, including many people in this room, have put a lot of effort into trying to persuade the international community to take a harder line, not to appease these actions. And of course, appeasement, that's a word that Britain has has been plagued with over many years. Back in the 1930s, we appeased the Nazis. Fortunately, we had one man, Winston Churchill, who stopped that appeasement. But Britain, other European countries, almost like to appease. And our attitude to Israel since the Balfour Declaration, from the Balfour Declaration onwards, our attitude to the Jewish state has been one of appeasement of the Arabs, which is why our role in this nation have been many times absolutely despicable, although hopefully today not to the same extent. But I think not only do we need to take a harder line and not appease them in the way of accusing Israel of things that Israel hasn't done when we should be accusing your enemies of things you've done. We should be taking a harder line in terms of we should go onto the offensive. We should challenge and destroy this idea that there is a right of return of Palestinians, destroy the idea that there is a permanent refugee status for Palestinians. These are the sort of things, as well as some of the measures that Greg mentioned, that should be pursued, I think, in the international community. Final point, I think there is possibly an opportunity now to achieve some progress here where we haven't achieved progress before. And that is because Europe itself is walking now, sleepwalking into a similar situation as you face. We face terrorism on the same scale, not the same scale, but in the same type as you face. And there is beginning, I think, to be a glimmer, just a glimmer of recognition among European countries, the populations and the leadership, that your enemy is the same as our enemy. And therefore, it may be in our interest to make common cause. We've seen this in small ways in the past. And when I, for example, worked in the Cabinet Office, the Prime Minister's office in the UK, the British condemned Israel for carrying out targeted assassinations against its enemy. And that caused a huge issue in relationships, particularly intelligence relationships, between the two countries. Since then, we've been doing the same thing because we have been facing the same enemy. And I was in Brussels last week, and I was talking to members of the dreaded European Union, among the people, and we were talking about Israel's experience of internal security and how that would relate to Europe. And one of the people I was talking to was the deputy head of the EU's international terrorism organization, counter-organization. While I was talking, the head of that organization was over here having talks with Shin Bet and others. And I think that shows the potential opportunity we have now to change certainly the European agenda. Thank you very much indeed for listening.